Hello, my name is Janice B. Gordon, and this is Scale Your Sales Podcast. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, listed number 9 of 43 best podcasts for every sales professional. I am Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert, recommended by LinkedIn Sales as one of 15 innovating influencers to follow. In today's episode of Scale Your Sales Podcast, my guest has a long tenure at Salesforce in enterprise sales, and prior to that in Google, now coaching her clients, but it really has a special flavor of coaching. In this podcast interview, we talked a lot about curiosity and talked about intention and how important project management is, setting the intention of where you need to go and managing that deal. So remember these 3 words: curiosity, intention, and deal management. We also talked about the differences between those entering sales and the purpose and reason why you would do that, and also the leaders in sales and what they need to be good at sales. So you're going to love this interview with my next guest. My next guest is a leader and sales performance coach. She leverages neuroscience to create lasting behavioral change, helping individuals and teams achieve results without burnout. She has over 2 decades of experience in tech, both as an IT leader at Google and as an enterprise SaaS leader at Salesforce. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, Marni Heinz.
And thank you for having me.
Marni's giggling because she says that she loves my accent, so that likes the way I say it. So I'm going to keep saying Marni all the way through, and you'll hear her giggling, which is great. Now, we are both part of Women Sales Pros, soon to be renamed as Women Sales Expert. And this is where I met Marni and was really impressed, super shocked. She's one of those quiet killers, she's in the background quietly, and then she comes and delivers something that is, wow, really powerful. So you're going to really love this conversation with Marni. So first of all, I'd really like your perspective on and advice on someone entering sales. What should they do as to ensure that this is the right career path for them?
Yeah, so one of the first things I would say is to really pause and reflect. Why is it that you want to go into sales? So I've heard a wide range of reasons why people will want to go into sales. One of them that I have noticed, it tends to be like a burnout sort of response, is I want to make lots of money and purchase designer handbags or spot effect. And often for someone that's their primary reason, it's not a strong enough why to hang on to that profession and see it last the test of time. In comparison, the people that I've noticed really excel, are passionate, are bringing value to the profession, and are really lighting up and enjoying it over the course of time, which can be 1 or 2 decades even, are those people who really have a passion for what the profession is all about. They get hyper curious. They want to help solve real material, meaningful problems. And they understand that the sales profession is more of a service profession than a profession about. So it's really more other focused and helping a buyer solve a problem. And getting hyper curious about what it is that buyer needs help solving, and being there to act as a strategic advisor. So I would say really get hyper curious about why you want to go into the profession, and go inward to say, hey, what about this profession lights me up? Is it a fit for me in the first place?
It's interesting that you mention burnout, but also kind of talking about what are the kind of key traits to be successful to manage your career without being burnt out. And it's interesting that traditionally top sales performers are promoted into sales leadership. So give me more perspective about that, because is it the same traits?
Yeah, what I have noticed, they change. I actually, before I moved into sales leadership myself at Salesforce, I interviewed, I think it was upwards of 16 different people. And they were all leaders at Salesforce who had gone from an individual contributor role within the company to a leadership role. And I did informational interviews to ask, what was it that you know now that you wish you had known when you first started in a leadership role? And hands down, some of the most common responses were the role is fundamentally different. And a lot of people jump in being the rock star top performer thinking, I will just carry the deal on my back and I'll win those deals, even for the weakest performers, the weakest link on the team. And they realized that that method for the way that they were able to be successful as an individual contributor didn't really work so well as a leader. It was almost the exact opposite. So they actually had to pause and they had to really practice their empathy skills. They had to get to know each individual person on the team and what was important to each individual person, and then adjust their management style and their leadership style accordingly to leverage the strengths of each individual person, which looks different from one person to the next. Skills kind of fundamentally change when you're going from individual contributor to leader because you're really relying on a team to help you hit your number.
It's interesting because I was talking to Justin Lee, a previous guest, about sales leadership and it almost kind of opposing traits. And certainly in the work that I do with Objective Management Group that have got 2.5 million assessed professionals from leader, manager down to sales professional, even sales support. And really understanding what those traits are down to the finer details to be able to often identify, what is the skill set for a leader, which is different to a manager, which is different to a sales profession and support. And it's really about having a clear understanding of what that is. Nevertheless, the industry is still using outmoded methods by still promoting the highest performers. How can we start to change that?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, I mean, you already gave a great example of some of the research, and I know assessments that are available through Objective Management Group. It's really looking at what are the skills that are required to be a successful leader. This is information that's widely known within, the HR talent development space that doesn't always make its way into the sales profession. So the information is out there, the data is out there, and there are ways in which you can assess, is someone ready for leadership? The time to actually train someone on being a great leader isn't when they arrive in that leadership position. It's the 6 months prior, grooming them, getting them up to speed, letting them know how it looks different, and really kind of tailoring, I would say almost tailoring programs for your highest performers, if that's the way in which you're going to promote people to then develop those leadership skills. And the training shouldn't end, as well as the mentorship. Once the leader, those first 6 months are critical. It's when most of the learning on the job happens as well. So I think more formal programs would be helpful, and or coaching that's available to first-time leaders especially.
Yeah. So it's interesting. How do you know that you've got the right people in the sales team to achieve your goals? So we talked about kind of leadership, but actually those leaders and managers need to know that they've got the right people in order to achieve the business objectives.
Yeah, I would say I've always noticed that the right people, there's different actual skill sets that can flex to represent what good looks like in sales. I was in a sales role for a period of time at Salesforce where I had the chance to work with some of the top performers in sales, in enterprise sales. I also sometimes was assigned to work with some of the lower performers, so I got to see the wide range. And what I did notice over time is there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach for what success looks like in sales. At the same time, there's often a common thread, and that common thread is having high emotional intelligence, being self-aware of how you are coming across to the buyer as well as your extended team that's helping you with the deal cycle, as well as being socially aware of the around you and what's appropriate in any given moment. And then also showing up with a high degree of curiosity and really being there to help the buyer solve their problem, making it less about you, more about them, and that typically that thread, if you pull on it and it's there throughout the entire deal cycle, is what makes high performers, top performers, and really kind of excel above and beyond the average performers out there.
So we're in International Women's Day, and I call it a month. We should have the whole year, you know. So what's your view in terms of that word curiosity, and how you've come into contact with so many top and middle of the road salespeople in your team that you've managed and nurtured and inspired and coached currently. So is your view on the diversity difference in some of these important traits? Is it more in female genders that naturally have particular skills that are relevant, like curiosity, or is it really across the board? It makes no difference. What's your experience?
I'll tell you my personal experience on what I've been
told.
They're two different things. I have a certification in emotional intelligence that I obtained for purposes of doing coaching on this very topic. That technically speaking, the data says that there's not a distinction in gender between people who are high in emotional intelligence. At the same time, I have noticed personally, anecdotally, that it does tend to be like curiosity and some of the other traits, self-awareness of emotional intelligence tend to be more naturally traits of women. The other thing, the more important thing, is that we describe them as traits. At the same time, it's a learned skill. So it can change and adapt and adjust. So once you kind of learn to pause, there's certain ways that you can basically improve upon emotional intelligence, get more curious, deepen your kind of understanding and your listening skills. And if you're practicing those, just like you would go to the gym, exercise, work out, flex a muscle, practice, and get better and improve at something like a sport, you can do the same thing when it comes to things like emotional intelligence, being curious and aware. I actually have the chance to coach, do sales coaching for Harvard Business School for their entrepreneurial sales program. And it's a great example of within, I think it's like 6 to 8 weeks, students go from not having done anything related to sales at all before, in some cases, to after 6 to 8 weeks, being in a position where they're performing really well in role play scenarios and demonstrating those skills of emotional intelligence, deep listening, curiosity, and really being more buyer-centric in their approach versus what we often see as the stereotypical salesperson that shows up speaking at you rather than more so listening to what's important to the buyer. So it can be something that is learned and practiced and adjusted over time. So the good news.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to dig into this word curiosity more and really understand what that looks like in sales, because a recent guest, Barrett King, used this word and like you kind of used it a lot to explain the key components that he looks for. So I'd really like your perspective on this word curiosity. How does that play out in sales?
Yeah, one of the ways that I've seen it most often play out in sales in a way that's really highly beneficial for the person in the profession. It benefits them as well as the buyer as well and other members of the extended sales team. To be curious requires you to really, when someone's responding to a question that you have, to listen and pause for a moment and say, do I understand what it's asking? If the answer is no, there's something off and I don't quite get it, give yourself permission to then go ahead and ask a follow-up question, clarifying question. Even that in and of itself can be helpful. What I have found most helpful in the way that I do coaching is that what I've noticed is if a seller's showing up just doing a line of questioning, it can feel like an interrogation for both them as well as for the customer or the buyer. And instead, an alternative option is to show up with a clear intention on what you would like to accomplish in that particular meeting at that particular stage of the deal cycle, which is just of the buyer and therefore also in service of the seller. With a through line of an intention of what you want to accomplish by the end of a particular meeting, all of the questions that you ask and the responses that you then receive, you can get curious about those responses and do a quick check with yourself. Does it serve the intent of this particular call, the end goal that we're all trying to achieve? And so I think curiosity with and aligned with and strong intention and a purpose can really be helpful, not just for a seller, but also helps guide and direct a buyer. Sometimes buyers actually are trying to figure out their way, just like sellers are trying to figure out their way, and you're acting as their guide. And so it really helps to be in service in that way when you're both curious and from a place of intention.
I really love that, and you're right. In the kind of training of sales is often kind of very much scripted, a scripted direction of where you want to take people, and that's ignoring where people are, at that moment in time, and being present to be an adaptable and flexible is really important. So, just kind of reiterating what you said to make sure that I and everyone else listening in understands it. So it's not really having a script of what the journey will be to discover whatever. It's actually having an intention, and I presume up front you're getting agreement with the customer of what the intention of the meeting is, what the outcome of the meeting is, where we need to get to. And once you've got that agreed and established, then it's actually negotiating your way there based upon each of the steps, not the ones that are laid out, but actually we have a starting point. And then based on what the response may be, there's going to be, kind of another step, direction, question based upon come from. So it's really, I really love this idea of yours, Marni, of having a stated and agreed intention, and that's it. And trust.
It sounds almost too simple. It's and at the same time, it's an upfront contract. To me, I always think those words sound funny because it sounds so official. It's just stating what your intended purpose or outcome is of any particular interaction that you're having so that everyone can stay aligned on that. I used to, as a sales leader, when I was at Salesforce, if I joined a meeting, often they were internal meetings, but if I joined a meeting and I couldn't figure out why we were all there for 30 minutes, that could be 10 people on, I would pause the meeting in the first 5 minutes and just say, hey, just so that we can clarify this, what's the intended purpose of this meeting? What would you like to accomplish by the end? And then we'd hit the reset button after that was shared by the person who had called the meeting so that we could all stay aligned and focused on that particular goal.
Do you know how many people are on this call thinking, I wish I did that 10 years ago and every meeting I've been in? Because more than half, how much of our time is wasted in meetings where it's like the email trail where everyone's copied in, it's just a waste of time. What is the intention? Does this person need to be involved? What's my input here? Just having clarity is just a good way of running your business and your life, isn't it?
Yeah, occasionally meetings can even end a little bit early when you follow that particular approach. If you accomplish what you need to faster than you expect, and that becomes possible. Yeah,
that's because you've had the clarity there. So I do love this, and I'm kind of like writing this down. It's like I need to do this more often. One of my other guests, Mike Gossett, and this is something that that's came out in our kind of discovery call before, was around how can your experience of sales competence directly impact customer. Talk a lot about buyer experience and customer experience and how the two things are directly related to sales, and so we can't have one without the other. And it was interesting that Mike Gossett said that today 80% of the process is deal management and only 20% is the sales methodology. And this came out when you talked about project management being one of the skills you have to master. So tell me more about why from your perspective, is project management a 101 skill in the sales industry?
Yeah, so my experience enterprise sales, where It is hyper important in enterprise sales where your deal cycle can be anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half, 2 years even sometimes. So if you're not able to skillfully manage key project milestones, tasks, dependencies, the 10, 12 plus stakeholders and influencers and decision makers that are involved in the deal cycle, you're just, every time you take a step forward, it might feel like you're taking 2 steps back. I would also say that even if you're doing sales for, small SMB type companies or smaller deal cycles, it's still critical because a deal cycle has key steps in the process with dependencies. And again, when I talked about that intention before, you need to act with an intent in every single interaction. So sometimes, like when you're in any particular moment in the deal cycle, reminding both yourself as seller as well as the buyer where you are in the deal cycle, what came before, and what you expect to come afterwards can be a great way to keep things moving forward and or identify if something's going sideways, again, both for you as well as for the buyer, so that things don't come at you sideways along the way. I've seen people that, have otherwise like amazing skills at sales, like the deep listening skills, curiosity, but maybe aren't strong in project management. And yes, the deals can get pretty hairy and go in so many different directions. So the project management 101 skills over the course of time have become more and more important as deals are more complex over the course of time.
And I suppose that helps you to manage the fact that things for the buyer and in their environment, and it's so complicated, there's so many people involved, so many stakeholders and people coming in and going out all the time. It's just by taking that pause where we are in this deal, where we've come from, what our intention is going forward. Has anything changed from when we last set our intention? And I would say 99% of the time it has. But often our buyers don't know how significant it is, or are not aware of the before, after act of these changes, because it's just happening constantly and immediately. And, things may change, but we don't know the impact of those changes until we take a pause and think, okay, well, is this affecting our intention of where we need to go? Do we need to bring that person in? Do we need to pause and take a step back based on this new bit of information? So I would imagine it's a lot of that kind of stop, start, reevaluate with that intention in mind.
Yeah, the other thing too, I would say, is I kind of hinted at this before. I have the benefit of having purchased software before. So I was in Google's IT department, and I was purchasing enterprise software on behalf of the legal department when I was at Google. And that experience allowed me to see and witness firsthand that I didn't know much about those things that I was purchasing, whether it was e-signature software, contract management. So as the buyer, I actually am at a disadvantage in some ways, and I really do need the help and guidance from, someone that is an expert in this space to help guide and directly along the process as a buyer. So sometimes we as sellers forget, like, how often does a buyer go out and purchase the software that you are selling? It might be once in their career because they have their day job they're doing as well. Or even if it's a procurement purchasing that one time, they're moving on to the next thing. So you're there to act as a strategic advisor and say things like, hey, I know we're at this point in the deal cycle right now. When I've been in this place before, or when I've seen others in this particular juncture in time, this is what I've seen worked really well, and this is what has, maybe not worked so well. Which path would you like to take? So you can be there to help guide and direct along the way, and don't assume that the buyer has all the right answers and knows where they're headed, because sometimes they're just figuring out alongside you. And you can be an expert because you might have done what you're doing more than they have even.
Well, one would hope.
Yeah.
So talk to me about your perspective on the early and the late stages of, a more strategic negotiation and tactics.
Yeah, I would say in the early stages of a deal cycle, from a seller perspective, you're there to build awareness and act as a strategic advisor. knowing that your buyer has probably already done a ton of research on the problem that you solve. I think there's research out there that says that by the time that a buyer nowadays reaches out to a seller or a vendor, they've probably already done 60% of their research on that particular problem and the solution that could solve it. And they speak to you, that's where they're at. And so what you're going to be doing to add value is building awareness. You're going to be, again, acting as a strategic advisor and being kind of an expert that they can go to and lean on. And that the really top-notch buyers also see that the thought leadership doesn't come from within an organization, but often comes from those experts that are external, and they're humble enough and curious enough themselves to really explore, what are the options out there and lean on those experts. I would say as the deal cycle keeps going, then you've kind of got that baseline foundation on both sides of where both parties are at. Information has been shared about the solution and what the problem is, and you might hold kind of some of those negotiation tactics a little bit closer to the vest. If you're in procurement, I highly recommend procurement people early on in the deal cycle just go into curiosity mode and learn everything you can and soak it in about the problem that you're trying to solve on behalf of your business stakeholders. And of course, when you get into the later stages of the deal cycle, totally appropriate, that's your role to negotiate on behalf of the company that you're representing. But early on, be more open and curious.
So what do you say to your coaching clients when they come up against a buyer or procurement that really are not open and curious? How do they kind of negotiate their way around that?
I would say it probably depends a bit on where in the deal cycle it shows up, because it's almost expected later in the deal cycle for it to be a bit tense. The key strategy that I've always used that I also recommend to others is to not downplay your own experience. So you are an expert in your own right, not just an expert in the product that you sell, but if you've been doing sales for, even a couple of years, how many deal cycles have you gone through and how many negotiations? So be confident in that expertise and just show up with a friendly sort of attitude, being there to be helpful. I have spoken to someone who was buying, I think it was coaching services on behalf of an organization in the talent dev department. And what he shared with me, and he was often playing a procurement role, he goes, who I liked the most when I was buying from all these different coaches that would constantly come to me and keep pitching? I was most impressed by people who were there to make my life easier. They were there to help me. And so if you remember that your role is to help someone else and make their life easier, being the seller, and even for the procurement person, and that's the tone and the intention to show up, it will come through, it will shine through. And you might not make everyone happy, but you're more likely to make most people happy if you're showing up there to be helpful.
Love that.
And you'll differentiate as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Because not enough people are doing it, which is great. That's a real opportunity for all of our listeners here. So you've talked about intention quite a lot. So I'm really interested in who is your hero and Shiro and why?
Yeah, so my hero is Thich Nhat Hanh. He is a Buddhist monk that is from Vietnam, and he was actually exiled from the country around the time of the Vietnam War. So he went to France, to the Bordeaux area, and he started actually a retreat center to bring mindfulness to the West. And so he speaks a lot, his teachings about the role of intention and being in the present moment and being curious, and the value that brings in multiple parts of our lives, whether it's in our personal lives, but also in our professional lives. He's even written a book about work and the value of mindfulness in work, and what it can bring to the table. Also worth sharing, emotional intelligence and some of the core concepts of emotional intelligence come from, have a mix of mindfulness embedded within them. So it's worth sharing that as well.
I love that you've brought that up, because I meditate the mornings and have been doing yoga for many years. So obviously I've come across Thich Nhat Hanh, who recently well, only about 18 months ago he passed, and he was really one of the kind of forefathers of mindfulness. That we know that word now, but when he was talking about it, it just seemed like it's some religious Buddhist thing that as now it's all part of our daily lives, and we're trying to get it into not only more into the workplace, but also into our schools for children as well. And especially post pandemic, it's become more important that we've take a breath, as he would say it. I remember watching a video from him. I don't need to get on a plane or buy a train ticket to go home. I need to just take a breath in. And being a meditator, he's absolutely right. Like breathing can take you anywhere. And so, I'm really great that you've brought that to the fore. And it's really interesting because, the words you use, curiosity, intention, all of this kind of helps kind of understand this foundation of yours, your hero, and why coaching and your style of coaching is so impactful. So how can listeners get hold of you, Marni?
Yeah, the easiest way is just go to my LinkedIn profile. So it's Marni Heinz. It's very simple. You can go to LinkedIn, look me up, MarniHeinz. From there, there's a number of ways you can get a hold of me, whether it's booking time on my calendar or going to my website from there. So yeah, or reaching out to me directly over LinkedIn. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing all your insights and knowledge. Thank you for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast, Marni Heinz.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast. If you like this discussion, feel free to listen to other episodes or watch the captioned show on YouTube and subscribe to future episodes. I would really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you.